Hi, everyone. A warm welcome to our viewers for today's show. Today, we are in this ongoing series about USM. We're going to be talking about architecture. Now, obviously, we have a great panel of experts to answer all of your questions during today's live event. If you're interested in service management, don't miss the discussion today. Get your questions in. Shanice is over in the social chat along with Blanche, so please let them know your name and the city where you're watching from. This is an interactive event, so get involved in the chat. Pop your questions in. If you have any questions, pop in your comments, get involved. If you agree with us or don't agree with us, that's absolutely fine as well. So just enter questions in the chat, don't forget. Okay. All right, so let's go and jump in, I think, and meet our expert panel. We have a great panel for you today. So the first panelist I'd like to introduce is Jan van Bon. You're probably no stranger to Jan at the moment, if you've watched some of the earlier shows. Jan is an enterprise service management architect, obviously, and he helps reduce complexity and achieve sustainable improvements with the USM method. Amongst being an author of probably over 100 books now, I think, it's safe to say that he is the expert in all things USM. So welcome, Jan.
Hey, it's absolutely great to be here and to be able to talk about such a great topic as architecture and systems, because they are at the core of everything we do.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And I don't think people quite realize how much of a core it really is. So excellent. Thanks. So Mikko is our next panelist, and also no stranger to this panel. He's also a very experienced service management advisor. He's a coach, a trainer, a consultant, and he's been in the service management and governance game for over 20 years now. I think his mission is to help people fix things, okay? All of those things that go wrong, really, in service management. That's his passion. So Mikko, welcome again.
Great to be here again, and I agree with Jan. So it's in the core, and actually didn't realize the term service management architect or service architecture until like 5 or 6 years ago, and now it's a core in what I do.
Fantastic. Peter Hoekstra is also, this is, I think, Peter's second appearance on this panel for USM, and he's a dedicated trainer, coach, and facilitator, and he is really specialized and passionate, I would say, about enhancing team dynamics and optimizing organizational architectures as well. So really good to have you on the show, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for introducing, looking forward, because I think today it's going to be maybe the toughest, but also the most interesting session. If you follow this one, you will understand all the others that come after.
You will, absolutely. I agree with you. Thanks, Peter. John, no stranger to the panel either, and it's certainly not a last but least for John. John has over 40 years experience in the IT industry here. And he's worked with so many leading corporations throughout his career, and he's been dedicated to quality improvement. Notably, though, John was the first USM professional and coach in the United States. So for all our American viewers, if you need anything USM, John's the man to talk to. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Nigel.
Great to have you on the show. So today, I'm just looking at our audience, and we have so many people joining online. We've got folks here from Singapore, which is really, really nice. So welcome, Donabet. We've got Magnus here as well. We've got Stefan from the UK, voters in Brussels. So many people to talk to. Henry from the Netherlands, and we've got Rashkiti from South Africa. So great, really, really good to have you all on today. Just remember, questions, no problem. Just pop them into the chat and we will get them over to the panel to answer live during the show. All right, so I think without further ado, let's jump right in and get to our first question. Now, I think the first question is really an interesting one. It is, what is a service management system? So Jan, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first with this one.
Yeah. Well, in USM, I think we like to build everything based on simple logic. So the thing we did is we decomposed the whole term. So first of all, it's obviously a system. And a system is defined as a coherent set of essential components that influence each other and that form an integrated whole. Well, that is what we use for a system. And then we applied the term system to the subject of management, not to technology as usual. We don't talk about technology systems. We talk about a management system. And when we had a management system, we then applied that to the context of services. And that's how we got to a service management system. Now, that term management system, that normally is quite a mystical term. If you go to things like ISO standards, like ISO 27000, they talk about information security management systems. If you go to 27 or to 20,000, they talk about a service management system. And no ISO standard has been able to explain us how you construct a management system. The only thing they do is they provide requirements for what it should comply with. And that's on page 1 of every ISO standard. So ISO then says, oh, you should go to ISO 9000 because that's about management systems. And then you go to 9000, and on page 1, it says, thou shalt have a management system that complies with the following requirements. So it doesn't say how to construct a management system. And that's what we did in USM. We made a specific, measurable, constructible management system that is simple, that is universal, and that can be used as a link in any type of supply chain, in any line of business, for any organization.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think that explains exactly where the background comes from. John, why don't you expand a bit on that, if you don't mind?
Well, I guess as an old idle guy, when you hear the word system, the first thing that comes to mind is a tool. So a lot of people immediately go to their ITSM tool when they think of the word management system. I also think that management system is often confused with an operating model. And the management system really fits within the operating model. Operating models are much broader in scope. The management system's focused on execution. So I look at it this way. If the purpose of the enterprise is to deliver value to customers, and services are the means of delivering that value, and management has to coordinate all the resources to consistently deliver that value, then your service management system is what enables the execution of your business strategy. So it's pretty important, and that's why I call it the heart of service management.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, if you don't have a proper service management system in place, you cannot say that you're really truly doing service management. Simple as that.
Yep.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would really like to recommend everybody to watch the hilarious recordings of Professor Russell Ackoff about system thinking, and system thinking is the opposite direction of observing. I see a lot of business analysts often zoom in too much, draw, for example, a swimming lane, which become input for a sprint or for development or for automation. System thinking is, instead of looking at a small part, it looks at a bigger picture and the entire system or the whole organization. And that's how you will realize how the parts are interconnected with each other. So I would like to promote the term business synthesis instead of business analysis, based on system management system, and train people to focus on the relationships between the actions, like what I always like to demonstrate, like the links in a chain. And with each link, the relationship between the process, the action, the people, and technology will be standardized. And this is how you can make it very complex if you only look at technology.
So true, Peter. By the way, you heard it first here, folks. Business synthesis, not business analysis. Okay. Yeah. That is the term. Okay. Any comments from the audience on that? I'd love to hear them in the chat. Okay. So the name of the professor, somebody is asking what the name of the professor was mentioned by Peter. Peter, can you, it's Ackoff that we're talking about here.
Russell Ackoff. Yeah.
We'll show a QR code for you in a couple of minutes. Don't worry, in the next question. All right. I think, Mikko, finish us off on this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I don't know a bit like what has already been said. In practice, when you walk into any organization and look what's happening there, it happens because of some kind of a management system. And the key term is some kind of it has not been developed. It has evolved in the silos. Nobody is actually looking at how does the whole system work? How does it interrelate? How does it interconnect? So that's missing, and that's where you should start. So look at the whole. And like Peter said, go for the Russell Ackoff. You cannot go wrong with the videos.
That is so true. That is absolutely so true. And you're right. It is a matter of looking at the whole. I think people often get sidetracked, particularly to remind what Peter said and John as well, when you talk about a tool, a tool is not a management system. Yeah. So it is about looking at the whole and how those systems interrelate with people, process, and technology rather than just one. All right, fantastic. Thanks, guys. I think that kind of describes pretty accurately what a service management system is. But our next question is, how do you specify a service management system? And I think this is a much more important question. John, why don't you kick us off with this one, if you don't mind?
Well, you have to define its scope, its structure, its components. But I think to me, it's not really a one-time event. You're going to need to sustain that management system over time. And it needs to be able to adapt to a changing world, especially today. And that's why I think USM is a method. People constantly call it another framework, and it's not. It's a method. And it allows you to not only establish a service management system, but sustain it over time.
I totally agree with you there. Jan, do you want to chip in on this one with the diagram?
Yeah, because at the top right, that's where the management system of the service provider is pictured. And I think this is a universal concept for delivering services. This is all based, as Peter said, on system thinking. And system thinking has a number of great champions. And it started out with von Bertalanffy way back in the 20th century. And another big name is Stefan Beer. You probably have heard of that. And it's the viable system model. And the third one, and that's the one that Peter mentioned, is Professor Russell Eckhoff. Some of these ideas of system thinking are very complex, like Stefan Beer's viable system model. That is still subject to debate for all the experts. They are not finding a solution. So in USM, we follow Russell Eckhoff's idea because he was a master in simplifying everything to the essence. The thing he said, he actually came up with the two core laws of system thinking. And the first one is any system is composed of essential components that can't do what the system can. So in a service provider system, the essential components are the people and the process and the technology that you see there. The people can't do anything without process. The process can't do anything without people. So none of the components can do what the system can, which is delivering supported facilities, services, to customers. The second law, and that's a hugely important law because we make a lot of mistakes there. The second law of Russell Eckhoff on system thinking was to improve the performance of that system, we must focus on the integrated improvement of all the essential components. That means that if you just reorganize your people component and you think you improve the performance of your system, you are dead wrong. If you replace a tool from the technology section by another tool without integrating that with people in the process, you are dead wrong when you expect that to have any improvement effect on the performance of your system. And those two are core to the thinking of USM in terms of USM's service management system. Now, what we now have on the top right of this image is a specific, a constructible approach of a management system that can be used to improve the performance of the whole.
Makes perfect sense. Jan, you explain these things so succinctly. It just makes sense. I agree.
It's all
I
based
can't
on
say anything about
logic.
that. I can't disagree. Awesome. Thanks for that. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well, I really would like to recommend to spend some time with your colleagues to demystify the term management. And what do you think together, what, for example, the three key resources are that you need to manage? And of course, USM holds the answer, but it's more important that you realize how different everybody thinks what management is within your organization. So spend the time, go for the interaction.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Perfect. Mikko, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, continuing on Peter's thoughts here. So you manage process, you manage people, you manage technology, and you manage the whole. And by managing that whole, you deliver and support, you manage services. And starting with then you go in the question, what is the definition of a service in any service organization? And it's the one key element of a service management system is give you the term, how do I define my services? How do I manage them to fit the need coming from And the answer is, it's not go to complex, it's go for the simplicity. And as USM are using the terms of one of my mentors, deceivingly simple. But that is why it's so hard to get a grasp on. But it's sometimes the answer is simple to complexity.
Sometimes you're right. It is, in fact, simple. And just a reminder to our audience, the service definitions we covered in both of the previous sessions. So go back to event 1 for USM, and you'll have a listen to that event and watch it, and you'll find out in event 1 and 2 all about the definitions of the service. And don't forget that we also have a Wikipedia for USM. So you can go back and watch those as well, those events, find the links to the Wikipedia. You Google USM Wikipedia, you'll find it as well. And we'll be showing some links throughout this show, which will take you straight to the Wikipedia, and you can navigate around there. But it's important to understand the definition of a service as well. Yeah. So excellent, guys. Let's move on. We have lots of live questions stacking in already. So I think let's move to our next one here. What are the benefits of having a standardized service management system? And I think for this question, I'm going to start with Jan.
Now, actually, it's in the word service management system because it provides a systematic approach to the management of your services. And can you imagine what happens if you do not have a systematic approach to the management of your services in a supply chain? And it supports the improvement of efficiency, the consistency of all terminology and all infrastructure that you use, the knowledge management, business alignment, risk reduction, customer satisfaction, everything is actually supported by the systematic approach to the management of your services. And I think in this image beautifully emphasizes that every organization, every team is part of a supply chain or an ecosystem. And the only thing we need to do is to define how they cooperate. So the interfacing between each of these components, which is actually the interoperability of the organizational context, that is going to be supported if you have a standardized service management system.
Fantastic. I think that makes perfect sense, Jan. Appreciate it. John, what are your thoughts? I'll leave the diagram up for you to speak to here as well.
Well, as usual, it's tough to add to what Jan has said, but the USM method, okay, it's a method for establishing this service management system. And I think what it does is it dramatically simplifies enterprise service management. And this is what enables the enterprise to execute more consistently in a rapidly changing world. And so this is really important, especially today.
Yeah, it is. Definition and having an architecture in place, understanding it and taking a look at the whole picture is critical in today's world. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, compare the idea of a standard with a language, like today that we choose to exchange in English. If you agree which language you want to use, you will better understand each other, but also it holds a vocabulary, some grammar rules. The same for architecture. Start with definitions and really agree what you mean with a definition, with a term. Build up your building blocks and evolve from there. And so architecture is beyond technology, and it's based on what you have agreed together. And if you keep it up to date, then you are building your service management system.
You are indeed 100% correct. Building up the service management system is a layered approach. If you don't take a layered approach to it, it will be very, very difficult to understand how this all fits together. Jan, you'd like to add back in, I think, to this, huh?
Yeah, I think if you look at that image again that you just showed, I think
Sure.
the most important aspect of having a standardized management system is that we do not interfere the actors' internal affairs. They are in charge of everything they decide within this red circle. And the people construction, the tool selection, or whatever they do, we only specify the way they interact with each other, which means every demand, every support question for the service provider, and the specification of what a service is. And everything within the red dot is an internal affair that we don't mess up with. So everyone can continue doing whatever he does, smart decisions, stupid decisions. That's usual, we see it all over. But actually this standardization level is limited to the outside of the management system. I think that is a wonderful trait of USM.
I agree. That looks like it is a fantastic way to look at it and approach it. It's not restrictive in that way. It isn't. But it does define who should talk to who and when. And that's an important part. Definitely. Thanks, guys. Let's take a look at our next questions. The live questions are stacking up here. Our next question is a really important one. What is architecture? So, Jan, I'm going to go to you first for this again, if you don't mind.
Now, if you want to have a standardized service management system, you must start thinking from architecture. And architecture is a very difficult term. It's abused all over the place. So in daily practice, we see two meanings of the word architecture. And the first and most common meaning, the design of a construction or a solution. Ooh, that thing has a great architecture. It looks nice. It's about the outside of the design. That is something that is used very often for the term architecture. But the other side of the coin of architecture is that it's actually about the building blocks and the rules, the principles that we should apply to apply the building blocks for a design. So these are two very different ways of looking at architecture. Now, USM is a method, so it does not specify the solutions or the designs of solutions. And therefore, USM uses the second meaning of the term architecture, and we tend to call that the meta architecture or the architecture governance or the mother of all architects or whatever. So in terms of USM, real architects are not designers. They are the experts that enable the consistent results of designers. That's why we need architecture.
Right. I love the way you define that. This isn't about making something visually appealing. Yeah. This is about constructing it from the hand up. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think let's move on. Peter, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear from you next on this one.
Yeah, how I look at architecture has been evolved in a few years, I think. To be honest, I related in the past mainly to technology, but today I realize it's much more. You need architecture for the whole enterprise. And today I challenge architects that they also should look wider, beyond technology, include the business, and look forward. Because most of the architects do sometimes protect a little bit the past with a focus on technology.
True. Very true. Very true. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I have to admit I'm not an architect, so I'll state that up front. But to me, architecture is kind of like an operating model or an instruction manual, and it tells you how to use the different building blocks for whatever you're building. So the building blocks for a technical architecture might be different than those for a residential architecture, and they're going to be different for a management architecture. USM is an architecture for managing services, and that's the way I look at it.
Right, absolutely. I agree with you there. I'm not an architect either, but I do understand the principles of what we're trying to do with this, which leads us nicely into our next question. We understand a little bit now about what architecture is, but what is service management architecture, which is slightly a different thing, isn't it? So, Jan, do you want to kick us off with this?
Yeah, well, the term service management architecture was actually coined 10 years ago in the USM book. It didn't exist before that. No one will find a mentioning of the terminology service management architecture. Now, in modern economy, if the goal of the organization, as John explained, is creating value for others by means of services, then that is the primary reason of existence for any organization. And that means that the architecture of creating value by means of services should be the starting point for all architectures. Technology should always follow on that. So that means that technology architecture should come second after you've decided what the means of your organization's productivity will be. So like enterprise architecture, it analyzes and specifies the way we use data and modeling of the business. So I think service management architecture is the original architecture that overarches every other form of architecture, and that all the others should be put in there in a service delivery context. So that means that the service management architecture term is actually the fundamental organization, that's architecture, of a service management system in its essential components their relationships with each other, and the environment that they interact with, the principles that guide their development. That's how we define service management architecture.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jan. That makes things very, very clear. John, what are your thoughts to add to this?
Well, this might be a little off track, but one thing that occurs to me when I hear these discussions is I always had the feeling that an architect was kind of at the top of the food chain or superior, and I always wondered if the practice frameworks were somewhat threatened by that. I don't know if that's true or not, especially when you hear terms like mother of all architectures. Everybody wants to be the manager of managers or whatever. But the truth is, a tremendous amount of effort and money and energy are going to continue to be spent implementing and evolving practices, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a good thing. But your overall operating model could include any number of practices, ITIL and COVID and any others. The beauty of a USM is they all interoperate within the USM architecture. So I really think that USM should be much more welcomed by these communities, especially those with an open mind.
I totally agree with you. In fact, John, I couldn't agree more. That is such a profound statement. The USM is not necessarily in competition to other frameworks out there, but rather much more complementary. So if you understand this, it provides things that none of those other frameworks can provide. So definitely, folks, take a look at USM from that perspective. Look holistically. Yeah. You're providing a service to your organization. You need to understand how these things fit together. Okay, thank you. Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, it is, maybe I can say 3 points about it. First of all, it helps to think beyond technology. And secondly, of course, you need to agree within your organization, first of all, what a service is, and have to reflex to use the customer provider interaction model. And then you will be better in reusing your building blocks. So that are my 3 points. And of course, I hope that people will have to reflect that if you think about service management architecture, that you think about the interaction model and of course about system thinking. Russell Ackoff.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our audience here. You know, we've got so many people online. Okay, it's just fantastic to see you all online. You know, and I like some comments here. I like your words, Peter. You've been adding in some great stuff here. We've got lots of live questions coming in as well. So really, really good news to see everybody online. And we've even got folks from Sweden here, which is great to see, from Amsterdam. So welcome, everybody. Don't forget, if you've got a question, pop it into the chat and we'll get it over. We do have time. We will make time today to answer them. All right, let's take a look at our next question then. Now that we understand a little bit about what a service management architecture is, what are the benefits of having a well-designed service management architecture? Jan?
The general benefits of any architecture is always consistency and sustainable solutions, because you apply building blocks under the guidance of an architect who also contributes the rules to apply the building blocks. So the results can be made consistent and therefore they can be sustainable. But a much more important aspect of a service management architecture is that the standardization of the management system enables the cooperation between actors in networks and supply chains. And that is the biggest challenge of today. We are all completely depending upon the work of others. That means that if your contribution to a supply chain fails, the supply chain fails. So no one can fail because everything must add up together to get to the intended solution. And that is the problem of today, the interoperability between actors in supply chains. We are all islands in the sea. They all defend their own private island. And the only way to break through that is to define a standardized interface between the actors, which is a kind of saying interoperability between organizations. And that is the main goal of a well-designed service management architecture.
Fantastic. That it is definitely a little bit utopia in many organizations I've worked in. Yeah.
Yes.
but it is something we all aspire to. But I think this is a really, really good way of putting it. Mikko, what are your thoughts?
Well, in a very concrete way, it's a set of tools in your toolbox to always find out where you are. If you start from a single interaction between service provider and one customer, so what is this situation that I'm approaching? Where are we at the moment? What are we talking about? We are talking about people, processes, tools, or the services themselves, or one element of a service I'm looking at from the customer perspective or the provider. Then you take this, and if you look at one of my favorite areas at the moment is talking about the service integration. What are we actually talking about when we're talking about the service integration? Well, good luck trying to do service integration without proper service management architecture, because then you will get into this whole complexity mess. So start with the simple, start with the service, and then you integrate. Yeah, you integrate people, you integrate processes, you integrate technology. Technology is one aspect, but it's integrating people and processes too. And that's what the proper service management architecture gives you tools to do. So, and you're never lost. It's like this universal GPS system. You go into any scenario, you apply proper service management architecture, and you always know where you are. You're never lost. You always know where you are.
Yep, I like that. You're never lost in that, and you're quite right. You cannot do this properly without having a well-designed SMA. It just isn't going to happen. You're not going to be speaking the same language, that's for sure. There's so much confusion, misunderstandings, and I think going back all the way to event one, I think we discussed how there are, if you ask 10 people about what the definition of a service, you're going to get 10 different replies. This is what is avoidable with a well-designed service management architecture, folks. Very important. Peter, your final thoughts on this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and it links also to one of the comments in our chat, where someone is saying like value architecture and USM is a key enabling element. And then I would like to say, maybe you should say not value architecture, but value chain. And it's a structure of change. And what I try to stimulate in organizations is to figure out what is your link within the chain and become better in interacting together so that you can improve the whole chain, like the whole enterprise system, instead of optimizing something on your own island. The whole thing is that you look at the enterprise and even after a while beyond, so that you can extend it to your partners or to your customer site. That's the idea.
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree. Thanks, Peter. Okay, so I think we've got a much better understanding now of why we need a well-designed SMA. Let's take a look at our next question, which is, how does service management architecture fit into other architectures? And Jan, I think we're going to start with you here.
Well, to be short, maybe the question is formulated not exactly as we should have it, because service management architecture shouldn't be fit into other architectures. It supports it. Just like you said yourself, the service management architecture supports enterprise architecture, business architecture, technology architecture, or whatever kind of applied architecture you want to create. So I think it is complementary to all the other architectures in terms of the specifications of building blocks, rules, etc. And the specific characteristic of a service management architecture, as opposed to all the others, is that it is a system. And most of the other architectures are always layered models or matrix models built of perspectives. Well, that is not a system approach. I think the service management architecture is the only one that provides you with a system approach.
Right. And that makes sense. That absolutely makes perfect sense. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, to me, the management system connects the dots between, services, people, processes, tools in the enterprise. It's the coordination of delivery and management of the services. So Ken Wendell likes to say that execution is the secret sauce, and then your service management architecture is what enables effective execution. So, today everybody is a service provider, and whether you call it the mother of all architectures or the heart of service management really doesn't matter to me. Execution is the secret sauce. And if you want to execute consistently, you need a service management architecture and a service management system.
Love it. Perfect. So succinctly put from everybody. That all makes perfect sense to me. Thanks, everybody. Okay, let's jump forward here because the live questions are stacking up here. I think this one, I'm going to start with John. What is the structure of the USM service management architecture, if you don't mind?
Well, the customer supplier interaction model is what shows us, there it is, thank you. It shows us the structure of the USM architecture and its key building blocks. So each component is a building block in this meta architecture. The customer on the left, the provider on the right, and the service in the middle. And we talked about services in the last session, but the other key building blocks are the routines of the provider, and of course, the non-redundant process model and standard workflows. But I think we have another session on that, so I'll let our chief architect elaborate.
Okay, chief architect, over to you.
Yeah, well, if you look at the service provider's management system, it actually has three essential components. As I said, a system has essential components that can't do what a system can. That's people, process, and technology. Those are the three interacting essential components of the service management system. The process dimension is the shared and universally applicable component. That is used in the same way for any line of business because they all do the same. The people component, the people architecture, we don't say much about that in USM because we don't want to interfere with local internal decisions about how to structure your people, and they are all different always. So we only talk about the building blocks like manager, coordinator, operator, and relationships, and we talk about principles like separation of duties. Everything you use to define your people construction should contribute to control. And the same applies to technology. We don't talk about how you should configure your technology or what type of product you should choose. We only say it has two functions. It should support your workflow system of who does what, and it should support the information on the infrastructure that you use in a managed infrastructure register. That's what IT people call a CMDB or a CMS. And the integration between these three essential components, that is the concept of the routine. The things that people do with their process and their technology to deliver the supported facilities to the customer. Now, this architecture is a very simple architecture that supports all the guidance from any best practice framework or standard that you can run into.
Lovely. That makes so much sense, Jan. Thank you for that succinct, again, explanation from the chief architect himself. Thanks, Jan. Okay, so for our next question is, can you give an example of how the USM service management architecture is used in practice? Now, before we jump into this question, we have a little video that I'd like to show you. It's a very short 2-minute video clip, so let's jump right in and listen to that quickly first.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Well, indeed, the Dutch government in 2022 has adopted USM as a part of the Nora, so our reference architecture for the Dutch government, specifically for the organizational view. So not all Nora is USM, but USM is a part of the Nora. And it's very important because we have 5 views for each architect for the Nora architecture. And one of these views is the organizational view. And in this part, the USM has been incorporated for already a few years. Now you can see that this 5-view model was introduced in 2016 to improve the communication between ICT architects and, let me say, non-architects. So specifically, the organizational level has been given a lot of improvement by introducing the USM model with the 5 processes. The interoperability between governmental organizations was what the Nora was all about. And I have to say that it was really an important step forward for us that we could say, okay, we can embrace this USM model and we can adapt it for the Nora. I think this the most important is interaction. It is the what you call the customer provider interaction, then you can see that we are not speaking about customers, but this is the way government services are set up. We combine this structure, this layout, and the 5-layer models. And this system approach, which is really quite different from before, it means that it's really the value chain, the perspective which we should aim at. We have published already this on the Nora, so it means in Dutch organizations it can be introduced now very quickly. I think this is a nice view on how the USM model is really used in practice.
And thanks to Eric so much for doing that for us. That really makes a lot of sense. And I think that should show you a little bit how serious that people are taking USM now and implementing this model within the government itself in Holland. So Jan, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind. Why don't you kick us off on this and give us some practical examples, maybe the idea of how this fits together.
This was a great example of practice. One of the images Eric used was the image of the customer service provider model, but then in the context of the government organization. And I think that was exactly this one. This is actually just the CPIM, the customer provider interaction model. But in government sense, you can't use the word customer because government says we don't have customers, we have citizens that we serve. But they actually play the role of a customer in a business context. So this is the exact same model for the management system in total that we used and that finally was seen and accepted as such by people living in the government. So they say government should put citizens first. Everything we do should be done from the perspective of the citizen. That is exactly level 4 of our maturity model that we've shown before, where USM focuses. So on the left side, we have a democratic description of the organization of the citizens, which is in a democracy, a 4-layered model. In the Netherlands, at least, it's municipalities, provinces, and ministries, and watershed management. So we've got 4 levels on the left. And on the right side, it has 4 execution organization types on the same 4 levels that compose the whole body of the government. And of course, this concept can be used again and again and again from the government to the right for suppliers of suppliers of suppliers, etc. So to support the whole value chain. Well, that is the first big step that Dutch government took. They acknowledged the fact that they live in an interaction model between government and citizens. Now, the second image that he showed was the layered approach of how they try to organize this one, to organize their public services. And actually, this is something that's very similar to what's very familiar for architects, the BDAT stack, and the business data application technology stack. It's a layered architecture, and now in the Dutch government, they called it views, because they want to get away from the hierarchical layer approach. So this is a very traditional way of looking at organizational components and architectural components, the 5-layered one. Now, the introduction of USM in Dutch government, and that's the third image that he showed, is now put in place in the organizational layer. It specifies the organization that provides the services that have been agreed by the democratic parties with the operational executive government organizations, which are laid down in the regulatory layer. And that second layer is now being approached as a system, not as a hierarchical component, but as a system. So now you've got a transition from the traditional hierarchical layered approach to a system approach. And the traditional approach of having data application, information, and technology layers, that applies to the solutions that the government provides to the citizens. So it's now referred to the domain of the service itself. Now, this is a fundamental change of perspective of public services from a layered approach, hierarchical, to an interoperability and interaction-based system approach. And this system approach now finally enables every individual team or government organization to use the standardized management system on the right side of the organizational layer. Every organization in government is also a number of people using processes and technology in a routine-based way to deliver supported facilities to their customers. So any customer journey, any value stream that they create is based now on the standardized templates of the USM routines for that management system. So you can imagine the impact what this can have on a nationwide scale when every government organization, every public sector organization would standardize its interfacing with all the others and optimize the way that the supply chains in public service now works. We are not going to be islands in the public service ocean anymore with captains on the ship that defend their territory. We are finally finding the opportunity to cooperate in a standardized way without anyone interfering with the internal business of that team or organization. And that is, I think, a fantastic move that the Dutch government made in terms of improving on a nationwide scale the way we deliver public services.
Fantastic, Jan. Thank you so much for answering and explaining that through. I think that makes perfect sense. And I think between the video from Eric and your explanations, it should be very clear now how USM service management architecture is actually used in practice. Okay, so I think the next thing we're going to do is we've got a lot of live questions coming in. So we're going to dive straight into them and take the first one here. So hands up, panel. What are some of the required enabling capabilities in people to make them think in systems thinking? How do we do this? So what are the required enabling capabilities in people? What do they need to know? What do they need to think about when we do this? So I think let's come to John first, and then we can go to whoever wants to answer next. John.
Well, I think understanding the customer supplier interaction model and understanding the management system will help them do that, because when they understand the concept of a service as a supported facility and how it interacts with the routines, they're going to understand how they fit into the overall system in a more effective way. And I'm sure others are going to comment.
Fantastic. Jan, your thoughts, then we'll go to Peter.
If you go to capabilities, I think the main capability of people to make this shift in their thinking is the capability to simplify what they do. If you just ask yourself, what would I do if someone needs the thing that I provide? What could go wrong? What should I do? What would their demand be? Then you will automatically come up with the 4 interface types that are reactive in the USM management system. It won't take you more than a couple of seconds to find them out. And that is exactly the simplicity that you need to consistently apply throughout the organization of your work. So I would say that the main capability is the capability to simplify and understand the nature of what you do.
Makes sense. Perfect. So we're going to try and get through as many of these questions as we can. So let's dive straight into our next question, which is, would data be an element in the process section that we showed? Okay? So I think we're talking about the diagram. Would data be an element in this? So Jan, why don't you jump straight into that one?
The answer is no.
Love it. No, it is not an element, and we'll move straight along.
Of course, databases would be an infrastructural element, but the data itself is not a part of the process. It's a part of the people using the process to process data. So it's not in the management infrastructural side, it's the use of the system for the purpose it was made for. Databases can be considered to be infrastructural components that you must be getting under control to make sure that they deliver whatever you agreed on and whatever you need them to do. But data itself, that's the consumption side of the service.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. It certainly isn't a part of an elements. Thanks, Jan. Okay, next question is, how would you address anyone coming forward with the agility argument? In other words, your service management system is too rigid and not supporting agile ways of working. Whatever this is when people loosely talk about it. Okay. Great. Well, agility is a real thing, I can assure you, and people do work in agile ways, and this does support it. So Jan, why don't you give us a quick overview on that?
People have been coming up with this argument for many years. Agile supposedly should support us in delivering better services, wouldn't it? It enables flexibility and short delivery times, short time to market, etc., shorter cycles. And the old waterfall approach was slumpy and log and whatever. So agile is a way of configuring your management system to align with the modern needs of business, which is quick. Essentially, nothing changes. Because at the end of the day, agile approaches should support the high quality delivery of services. So the whole idea is still there. The way you configure your management system is going to be in more shorter circles. And that's exactly the way USM had defined it before the word agile ever came to us.
Yeah, and I just want to echo exactly what you're saying there. Agile would definitely support this, and USM supports Agile in exactly that way. Yes, it will be slightly shorter in your circles, okay, in each one, but people sometimes get confused and say, yeah, but the service management system is too rigid. The service management system is not an Agile system. It's not meant to be an Agile system. Okay? What is Agile is the way you are thinking. Business agility is a concept you need to think about rather than does my SM or service management system support agility? Because the system is just a system.
Yeah, and you can download a nice white paper about how Agile and DevOps are supported by using USM to configure that from the USM portal.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thanks, guys. We're going to jump forward because we've got so many questions to address here. Okay, so the next question is, so should we even have a value architecture, and USM is a key to enabling element for it? Okay. Jan, do you want to take that one?
Peter already responded to this.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do it, Peter.
It's not the value architecture, it's the value creation system that provides the value. So if you have an architecture, you should have an object that it applies to. A value on itself is just a result in the system of the receiver. You create value, which means that you improve the way the receiver works. So USM enables that, of course. USM enables the delivery of value. Value architecture is not a term that I would prefer to use.
Right, perfect. Let's move straight along to the next question. Excuse me. So this interoperability of actors, like it. This means USM is the orchestration of people, process, technology. But isn't this what other architectures also claim, i.e., or e.g., should we say, enterprise architecture, not referring to Togaf or other models in general? Peter, jump us into this one if you don't mind.
Yeah. Basically, the statement is correct. Others are emphasis also about the necessity to focus on these resources. But what I really like are two additional things within USM. First of all, the interaction model, and that you train people to think in the chain. And that's what the missing part is, for example, in Togaf or in other architectures, or even in the layer thinking. That you see that has been embraced by the Dutch government within the Nora. Move away from layers and start to think in an interactive way, and then you understand the value of USM within architectural thinking.
Right, perfect. Thank you, Peter. Let's jump straight forward because we've got more questions that have flown in here. So this is an interesting one. So SMA patterns instantiate enterprise architecture patterns for specific operational services delivering value, right or wrong? What do you guys think?
I must read this in more detail, yes. Of course. Service management architecture patterns, that is actually what we defined as the routine patterns. We only have 8 templates that you can use to cover any management activity you'll ever have to do as a service provider. and they instantiate enterprise architecture patterns. Now, enterprise architecture is about the application of business. It's about the real world, the living world. The architecture of USM is about the management of the real world. So it's the system approach. That is a different domain. And of course, it specifies the operational delivering of value, but that's on the enterprise architect. They model data modeling ways of describing the business.
Right.
USM
It makes
supports
sense.
all that. But it's complementary to the enterprise architecture approach.
Yep, it is. Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, very short, because I see the term value popping up so often. And but a system exists only if it generates value. And so in the end, based on the way that you succeed to do what you have agreed with a customer, you will generate value and they will come back or not. And then the system will die.
True, true. Peter, this one statement you make there, a system exists only when it generates value. Yeah, it's like to correct that and say a system should only exist when it generates value.
Yeah.
But in many, many organizations, I think we've all seen the opposite, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, guys, this is going to be our last question. I just want to shout to the audience, thanks for so many live questions. We still have a couple of unanswered questions, but we will get you answers to those questions. Yeah, watch out for you in your email inbox and on LinkedIn. We'll get you answers to those questions. Okay, folks, last question for today. The Nora government example, USM is applied in the organizational layer of the show and 5 architecture layers. Is this an example of what Jan shared earlier? In other words, USM is or can complement existing architectures. Jan, I think this one is going to be for you to answer.
Yeah, indeed, it's a great example of how people can do it in practice. USM can specify a part of a traditional layer approach. Like in this case, Eric Brouwer said, USM is only used for the organizational layer of the 5 layers of their architectural modeling. And that's one side of looking at it. On the other side, all the other stuff is the result, and all the application data, infrastructure, etc., is the result of managing decisions that are structured by USM. So USM supports the delivery of services in terms of data, information, technology, applications, anything that you find in practice. So it supports the delivery of well-constructed, consistent, and sustainable solutions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jan. I appreciate all the answers, as does the audience. We're getting lots and lots of wonderful comments from people. So I'd just like to quickly walk around the panel while I show some of those. Just get your closing comments before we close the webinar today. Jan, what are your closing thoughts for today?
Well, I hope this elaboration on the concept of system and architecture helps people to get a firm base on whatever decisions they take in practice, whatever guidance they find useful in practice. It all must be built on a solid base, a foundation. That's the whole idea of USM. So in that sense, USM is completely complementary to all the other frameworks, architecture, models, and reference stuff that you can find out there. But it's also fundamental, basic, and essential. You can't do without.
Right, absolutely. Thank you, Jan. Mikko, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, the proper service management architecture actually helps you to get rid of all the stuff you don't need and focus and improve all the good stuff you already have in your organization. So it gives you the tools to do that, and keep an open mind. That's my advice.
Yep. Keep an open mind, absolutely. I think that's such a sage piece of advice, though, Mikko, because keeping an open mind when you're looking at different ways of doing things is so critical. If you approach it from, oh, I know this framework or this standard that I like and I implement and it does, everything and I'm comfortable with it, step outside your comfort zone because there's a whole new world out there. There really is. Peter, what are your final closing comments, if you don't mind?
Well, if you have joined us until this moment, then take also the time to look at the previous session, part 2, where we spoke about what is a service, because there's the same logic and helping you a lot to decompose what a service is. And of course, there are more sessions coming. So Thanks for those joining, but also take the time to look back at the previous session.
Absolutely, for sure. John, what are your final remarks, if you don't mind?
Well, if you're an enterprise trying to establish enterprise service management, you should make an effort to understand the USM method. That's what I would say.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Make
Take
an
the
effort.
time to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. So I want to say thank you once again to our panel, and a wonderful thanks to our audience. You've been great once again. Been lots of you online, submitted tons of questions. We'll get back to you with answers on those. All right. So basically, if you have a look at the upcoming shows, we've got a few things. Over on our website, by the way, you can search for the answers to over 3,000 live questions now. Just going to pop up what the next shows are going to be coming on. Don't forget, you can also listen to the audio versions of our podcast. And looking ahead, on the 19th of September, that's 12:30 BST, we've got a webinar on neuroscience for change at work. Thursday, the 17th of October, we'll be delving into design thinking again, navigating the business challenges with design thinking. That should be really interesting as well. So head over to our website, everybody. All the details are on the website. Register for those events and look forward for our next USM event. And thanks, everyone. We will see you on the next show.